The iron door groaned, a rusted protest that echoed through the hollow silence of the manor. I pushed through with the last of my strength, my breath hitching as the supernatural frost outside clawed at my heels. I slammed the door, finally cutting off the storm's icy reach. I had expected a tomb, a cold, empty ruin where the king's inquisitors would never think to look for a healer like me. Instead, the air inside was thick with the scent of ozone and iron-rich blood. A torch was already lit, its amber flame dancing against a cracked stone pillar. In its trembling light, I saw him. He was slumped against the stone, dark leather armor shredded at the shoulder to reveal a wound that seeped a black, unnatural rot. He looked to be in his early 30s, his face a brutal, sharp symmetry even through the grime. I didn't stop to think. I didn't know that the man bleeding out before me was Alrik Thorne, the 32-year-old Iron Alpha King of the Ashen Kingdoms, a monarch believed dead by the half of the continent currently hunting him. To me, he was simply a soul in need. I crossed the floor, my footsteps light on the debris. As I knelt, I opened my palms, and a swirling orb of golden light pulsed into existence. Alrik's eyes snapped open, intense, predatory, and glowing with an inhuman amber light. I had no idea who I was helping, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. My hands trembled as I reached for the edge of his leather armor. At 23, I had healed 100 broken men, but the 32-year-old stranger leaning against the pillar felt like a mountain carved from shadow. As I peeled back the blood-soaked tunic, my breath hitched. The wound was a jagged tear, seeping a dark, oily rut that seemed to fight my very presence. I didn't ask permission. I simply pressed my palms against his heat. The physical contact was a jolt of electricity, skin on skin, raw and dangerously close. I channeled the golden spark, my magic pulsing into his torn flesh. Something about this injury resisted me, a cold malice woven into the wound that I had never encountered. But I pushed harder, working by pure instinct. He didn't make a sound. No grunt of pain, no sharp intake of breath. He simply watched me, his amber eyes glowing with a predatory intensity that pinned me in place. I kept my gaze fixed on the task until the skin finally knitted together, leaving only a faint, silver scar. Alrik, he rasped when I finally asked his name. Nothing else. I bandaged the area with clinical efficiency before retreating to the opposite wall, putting distance between us. "You're not going to ask who I am?" he asked, still not looking at me. "I never ask who I'm healing," I replied. A flicker of an almost smile crossed his sharp features. "That's either very professional or very wise." "Both," I said. "Welcome to Bound to the Alpha. If you're gripped by Elowen and Alrik's story, stay until the very end to see what the shadows reveal next. Don't forget to like, share, and tell us your opinion in the comments." Morning light filtered through the manor's high, cracked windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced between us. My heart sank when I checked Alrik's shoulder. The skin I had knit together last night had partially unraveled, a dark, pulsing shadow resisting my light. I treated him again, the golden glow of my magic feeling strained against the persistent chill of the curse. We ate dried rations from my pack in a heavy, shared silence. As the hours passed, Alrik grew restless. He was a man built for action, not recovery. He paced the hall like a caged predator until I finally found him in the library. It was the only room where the roof still held, smelling of damp parchment and ancient secrets. He stood by a shelf, his large, calloused hand trailing over the spines of rotting books. "This manor belonged to a scholar lord," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "He was erased from the histories for refusing to swear allegiance to the crown." "History is written by whoever wins," I murmured, leaning against the doorframe. Alrik went quiet, his gaze fixed on a leather-bound volume. "Yes," he said, his tone unreadable. "It is." I watched him, wondering what a warrior knew of lost histories. "Why did you come here, specifically?" I asked. He turned, his amber eyes meeting mine with a jarring honesty. "Because no one would look for me here." The simplicity of his answer stopped me. I didn't press further, and neither did he. But as we stood in the fading light, the space between us felt smaller than it had the night before. "Stay with us on Bound to the Alpha to see if their fragile trust holds. Like, share, and let us know. Do you think Alrik is starting to see the healer, or just the magic?" By the third morning, the silence of the manor felt heavy, like a held breath. When I peeled back Alrik's bandages, my heart plummeted. The wound hadn't just unraveled, it was festering with a sickly, violet light. As I hovered my hands over his skin, I didn't just see the injury, I felt it. A cold, oily thread of malice was woven directly into his fibers, a dark curse that mocked my healing spark. I could stabilize the pain, but I couldn't pull the poison out. "It's a hex," I whispered, my voice trembling as the gold light in my palms flickered. "Someone used a cursed blade on you." Alrik didn't flinch. "I know." "Who does that to a man?" I asked, looking at his sharp profile. "That's not a soldier's strike. That's an execution." He didn't answer, his jaw tightening as he stared into the shadows. In that moment, my rule of not asking felt dangerously naive. This wasn't a traveler or a rogue. This was a man someone had tried to erase from existence. He wasn't just recovering, he was hiding. That night, I found him sitting by the fire, the rhythmic shing-shing of a whetstone against his heavy blade cutting through the dark. I sat across from him, uninvited. He glanced up, his amber eyes unreadable, but he didn't tell me to leave. "How long have you been running?" I asked softly. "I don't run," he rasped. I looked pointedly at the dark, cursed stain on his shoulder. Alrik held my gaze for a second too long. Then he was the one to look away first. For the first time, the king felt human. I sat on the frozen stone floor, his heavy leather coat draped over my lap. I had been mending the jagged tear in the lining, a distraction from the growing tension, when my needle snagged on something hard. Reaching into the secret seam, my fingers closed around a heavy band of cold gold. I pulled it out, and my heart stopped. Engraved on the face was the twin wolf crest of the Ashen Kingdoms. Every healer who had ever hidden from a royal inquisitor, every child raised on the bloody legends of the Wolf King, knew that mark. The man resting in the other room wasn't just a soldier. He was Alrik Thorne, the Alpha King. I didn't say a word. All day, I moved like a ghost, serving breakfast and tending his wound with a hollow, mechanical efficiency. I watched him differently now, hyper-aware of the predatory grace in his movements. I caught him watching me too, his amber eyes weighing me. Was I a witness he was merely tolerating? A liability to be erased once his strength returned? By evening, the silence finally broke. "You know," he said. It wasn't a question. I met his gaze, my pulse thundering in my ears. "Yes." A silence so long the torches flickered and dim stretched between us. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked quietly. "I'm more afraid of what happens to people who know things kings want kept secret." "I'm not going to hurt you," he whispered. "I know," I replied. "I'm not sure that's the point." The day after I found the ring, the air in the manor felt different, less like a predator's den, and more like a shared confession. Alrik began to talk, filling in the hollow spaces between us. He spoke of Aldrich Voss, the general who had been his right hand before driving a hexed blade into his shoulder. He told me about the ambush and the scouts who were undoubtedly tracing his blood through the snow even now. He wasn't asking for my sympathy. He was simply handing me the truth because I already held his life in my hands. As the shadows lengthened, he spoke of the kingdom. Not the glory or the gold, but the crushing weight of the Ashen Throne. He described the villages Voss had burned for refusing taxes and the people he hadn't reached in time to protect. He had been a king since he was 19, a boy soldier who had never known a day of peace or a person he could truly lean on. I realized then that the rot on his shoulder was nothing compared to the scars on his soul. "Who do you have?" I asked softly, my hands pausing over his bandages. "In that capital, who is there for you?" Alrik looked at me for a long moment, the amber glow in his eyes softening into a raw, haunting exhaustion. "Right now," he rasped. "You!" That evening, as I treated the wound, he finally allowed his eyes to close while I worked. It was a small gesture, but for a king who had spent 15 years watching his back, it was a monumental surrender. He was finally letting the wall come down, and in the silence of the library, I felt the exact moment he chose to trust me. The world was still draped in the heavy, pre-dawn gray when I began to pack. My movements were practiced and silent, the careful efficiency of a woman who had spent her life learning how to disappear before the sun could pin her down. I had every reason to go. I was a wandering healer, an outcast with a forbidden spark, not a political pawn to be sacrificed in a king's civil war. Alrik's wound was stable for now. He could survive long enough to summon his own people once I was gone. I reached the heavy oak door, the iron handle cold against my palm, when his voice cut through the shadows. "The wound. It won't hold without you." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. "I know," I whispered. "Then you know you're not just leaving me," Alrik said, his voice closer now, stripped of its royal iron. "You're letting the curse finish what the blade started." I finally turned. He was standing by the pillar, his face pale in the dying torchlight. His expression wasn't a command. There was no authority in his stance, only a raw, honest need I had never seen on a king's face. "I'm not asking as the king," he said, his amber eyes searching mine. "I'm asking as the man who owes you his life and doesn't know what that means yet." The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of the choice. Slowly, I let go of the handle and set my bag down on the stone floor. I didn't say a word. I simply walked back to my place by the fire and sat down. In the morning, the bag was still by the door, but I was still there. The fire was lower than it had been since I arrived, the wood supply dwindling to a few glowing embers that struggled against the gloom of the library. To keep the chill of the manor at bay, we sat closer than we ever had before, our shoulders nearly brushing. Neither of us acknowledged the proximity, but I could feel the radiating heat of his body, steady and grounding. "Your magic," Alrik said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. "Where did it begin? A girl with your skill could serve any lord in the continent and live in silk. Why wander the mud?" I found myself telling him more than I intended, about the grandmother who taught me to see the light in the marrow of bones, and the night I had to burn my own home to keep the inquisitors from finding her books. In return, he spoke of the first time he realized the crown wasn't a gift, but a tether that pulled tighter the more he tried to lead. The air between us grew heavy, charged with a sudden, unspoken weight. Alrik reached out, his large, calloused hand covering mine. He wasn't checking my pulse or seeking healing. He was simply holding on. I looked down at our joined hands, the contrast of my pale skin against his dark, scarred knuckles. "This is a terrible idea," I whispered. "Yes," he agreed, his thumb tracing the back of my hand. Neither of us let go. Between our palms, the golden orb of my spark rose of its own accord, pulsing with a warmth that felt like a heartbeat. It hovered there, responding to the contact in a way I had never seen. A sharp snap echoed from the hallway outside. Alrik went still, his hand retreating as the wall between us went back up, suspended, but no longer closed. Something had shifted that could never be unsaid as he rose to check the perimeter. The dawn didn't bring light, only the silent shadows of Voss's scouts. They moved like ghosts through the manor's arches, professional and lethal. Alrik met them with a roar that shook the rotted foundations, his wolf surfacing in a terrifying display of raw power. Even injured, he was a whirlwind of steel and teeth, but they were too many. When an assassin lunged at Alrik's blind side, panic surged through me. I didn't think, I simply threw my hands out. The golden light that usually soothed skin erupted with a violent, searing heat, burning through the scouts like holy fire. My magic didn't just heal, it protected him with a ferocity it never showed for me. As the last body fell, the world tilted. My knees hit the stone, my vision tunneling into black. Alrik caught me before I struck the floor, his touch frantic. One of his loyal guards, having finally tracked the king's scent, knelt beside us. His face went pale as he checked my pulse. "She's been drawing from her own life force," he whispered. "To fight the curse in your blood, she's been giving him her years." Every treatment, every touch, had been a slow suicide. I looked at Alrik, seeing his horror, and felt only a strange, distant quiet. "Oh," I rasped. "That explains the headaches." Alrik didn't leave my side that night. He sat in the dust, a king reduced to a man, watching my shallow breaths. He finally understood what it meant to be truly healed, not by duty, but by a sacrifice he never asked for. I woke in a real bed, heavy quilts and the smell of cedar, for the first time in years. Alrik had cleared the manor's best room while I drifted in the wake of my own magic. My body felt hollow, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw him standing by the window. His shoulder was finally clear. The dark rut had vanished. I had healed him completely, channeling every bit of my spark to save his life. I was no longer a necessity. I was just a girl in a ruined house, and the silence between us felt like a goodbye. Alrik sat in the chair beside me, a cold cup of tea on the floor suggesting he hadn't moved for hours. He didn't offer a title or a royal decree. He looked at me with those amber eyes, now clear of pain but filled with a strange, new vulnerability. "I'm going back to take my throne," he said, his voice low. "I don't expect you to come, but I want you to, not as a healer, as..." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I've been a king for 15 years, Elowen. You're the first person who ever saw the man underneath. I'd like to keep knowing you. I know that isn't enough, but it's the most honest thing I have." I looked at him, truly seeing the man who had let a monster save him. "I have a rule," I whispered. "I never ask who I'm healing. I'm breaking it. Who are you, Alrik, when you aren't being a king?" He looked startled, then his shoulders finally dropped. "I don't entirely know. I'd like to find out," I said, "if you're willing to let someone watch." He reached out, opening his hand palm up, the same gesture I had used to heal him. I placed my hand in his, my fingers fitting perfectly against his scarred palm. As we left the manor at dawn, I looked back at the dark hall where I'd first found his light. It wasn't an empty place anymore. I wasn't just surviving. For the first time, I was choosing exactly where I belonged. Thank you all so much for following Elowen and Alrik's journey to the very end. If you loved the story, make sure to like and share it with your friends. Join the pack by subscribing to the channel, Bound to the Alpha, so you never miss a new adventure. I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in the manor? Let's keep the conversation going in the comment section below.